Sometimes I find myself struggling with gratefulness. And if you're in the same boat, then this psalm is for you. I want to welcome you to Psalm of the Week, where I just take you through a psalm that I have been studying each week. In fact, it comes from a psalm that we as a church have been studying for the week. So I'm just going to show you my notes and the things that I noticed. And hopefully, as we work through this, it helps you better understand not only the psalm, but hopefully how to study the psalm. There were some repetition things that I found in this psalm that I'm gonna point out to you, and hopefully, as you read it, you found them as well. But the first thing we're gonna mention is that, once again, there's no author mention. It's an unknown author to the Psalms, and, then as well, then moving down through, I said I found some repeated things. This psalm is a repeated call to a grateful life, and when I see God repeating himself in scripture, it always draws my attention to that because God doesn't waste words. All of scripture was inspired by him. So if he's repeating himself, it's to get my attention. The psalmist really writes this to help us see the reason for our thankfulness, the reasons that we should be thankful to God. So let's work through here. And I'm going to do this maybe kind of a little different. This is a long psalm. We're not going to read every one, but I first want to I want to show you the repetition. I've highlighted in a manner in which they all go together. So if you look on the left side of my screen here, um, we see the purple is, first of all, that's the calls to give thanks to God, for he is good. Give thanks to God for his loving kindness. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness. We see this continued repetition. Once again, let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness. But then as I saw this repetition, my mind said, okay, I started to think about it. I wanted to know what immediately followed that. And as I studied this psalm, I studied it in stages. As soon as I started seeing the repetition, I kind of just pulled back and read quickly through the psalm to find the repetition. Then I came back and looked at what followed the repetition. So there's a couple of different things that followed. The green highlight is what I would consider a command. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his loving kindness endures forever. Verse 2, let the redeemed of the Lord say so. This is a command. I am commanded to say so, to proclaim my thankfulness of the Lord, to proclaim my redemption in thankfulness and praise to him. But then, keeping going, we see following this thankfulness, there's a reason given, and I've for, right? Give thanks for this reason. He has satisfied the thirsty soul, and the hungry soul he has filled with what is good. And then we see it again in verse 15 and 16. We give thanks because he has shattered the gates of bronze and cut the bars of iron asunder. Still going on. We see again a command. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and his wonders of the sons of and for his wonders of the sons of men. And then the command, let them also offer sacrifices of thanksgiving and tell of his wondrous works with joyful singing. Continuing down, we have another thanksgiving and a command. Let them extol him also in the congregation of his people. So, what I noticed here is really this our thankfulness follows with an action most often. And if not, the psalmist says, here's why we're thankful. When I read these, I found this to be interesting as well, because then these reasons to be thankful, they didn't make sense, and that's because I hadn't read the whole psalm, but this was really helpful for me to start to break this down in the way that I studied the psalm, because if we keep going now and we keep kind of breaking this down, we see it's divided up in sections. Now, my Bible, if you can see over on the screen here, the number verse 4 is bold. And as we go down through here, you see these bolded numbers. Now, the Bible I was reading in this morning as I was preparing this did not have that. So I had to kind of discover this as I was studying and reading. And this is a really interesting and powerful psalm. The psalmist uses very poetic, picturesque language. This is one of those places where, yes, the Bible is taken literally, but the description of what's going on is not to be taken literally, but is to be taken as a picture of what's happening. There's really 4 or 5 different pictures here that the psalmist uses to describe Israel's history. And I think as we work through this, we're going to find how easily it describes our lives and how easily we can apply it to ourselves because uh, these are not meant to be taken literally in or physically, but they are pictures. They're spiritual pictures of their lives. So I said I'm not going to read all of these, but I will give you a little bit of an idea here as we jump down to verse 4 says, "They wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They did not find a way uh, to an inhabited city. They were hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them, and they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He delivered them out of their distress. He led them also by a straight way to go to an inhabited city. Let them give thanks." So he gives them a reason to give thanks. And when I first read that, my mind went to what we've been studying. Psalm 105 was a greater history of Israel. Psalm 106 was the history of the Exodus, which this sounds like the history of the Exodus. But if you study it out, come to realize that this is not specifically what the psalmist is talking about here. The psalmist um, is is showing these as a picture of their spiritual history. Now this becomes very applicable to me and to yourself as well as we understand this idea of spiritually wandering in the wilderness in a desert region, finding no way for ourselves, wandering around, yet God delivers, God leads. We see that redemption, we see that salvation. That's why in the beginning we're told, "Let the redeemed of the Lord say so." This is a psalm of thanksgiving, but it's a psalm of our redemption. We give thanksgiving because of our redemption. And some of you, possibly, as you read this, you say, "Boy, I can identify with this idea of wandering spiritually empty in the wilderness, looking for something until God found me and He gave me direction." Let them give thanks is the command. Because of that, He satisfied your thirsty soul. He filled you when you were hungry. Spiritually, He gave you what you needed. And that's the beauty of the psalm. Moving on to verse 10, another picture here in verse 10. God rescues from prison. It says they though there were those who dwelt in darkness and the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and chains. The psalmist is writing about spiritual prison. And then we begin to see that God saved them out of their distress. He made them free. Not only is He a God who leads and guides us out of the wilderness, but He brings us spiritual freedom. There's a description here that's very vivid if we look at this in verse 10. Prison at this time that this was written was very much a dark place where there was probably imminent death coming at some point. They were going to be executed and they might not even know when that is. The picture is being given of living in darkness, in fear of execution, not knowing when your life is going to end. This is a picture that we can understand before Christ. This picture of the depths of despair that we were in as sinners, the darkness that was in our lives, the feeling of hopelessness and imminent death. Living under sin gives us that same feeling. But the beauty is in verse 13, He saved them out of their distress. We can have life, we can have freedom. Let them give thanks to the Lord. He shattered the gates of bronze, He cut the bars of iron asunder. The freedom that God gives from our sin, the forgiveness that He gives to bring us out of the depths, out of the darkness. This is an incredible picture. So we keep going. We get another picture in verse 17. We see these pictures that the psalmist is giving us. He rescues from sickness, but there's a specific type of sickness that the psalmist is talking about. He says this: fools, because of their rebellious way and because of their iniquities, were afflicted, for their soul abhorred all kinds of good. Even to the point, it seems to be saying their deathbed. They drew near to the gates of death. So, what I want us to see is the type of sickness that the psalmist is talking about here. Calls them fools. Often, we as sinners bring a sickness on ourselves for our own foolishness. Now, I don't believe that when somebody's sick, you assume they're sick because of their sin. And I don't believe that's the sickness that's being talked about here. But in our foolishness, uh, in drunkenness, what do we bring on ourselves? A sickness that our body becomes sick, sometimes to the point of death, because of our drunkenness, because of our gluttony, because of other sins that are in our lives. And that's what the psalmist is describing here, this sickness from sin that we bring on ourselves. And I see this because it kind of backs it up in verse 20. It says, and he delivered them from their destruction, this destruction that's being brought on themselves. And we look at somebody who's living in a life of sin and living, say, in a life of drugs. What's that doing? That's bringing destruction on their lives. And we watch that and we see that. The beauty is God gives deliverance from that. And the psalmist says, the children of Israel lived a life of being in just destruction from their sin. They were there. This is their history. But let them give thanks for God, for the Lord and his loving kindness, because he delivered them from their destruction. He delivered me from my destruction. He delivers you from your destruction. This is the story of redemption. Verse 23, another picture is given here. Those who go down to the sea in ships, who do business on great waters. He's talking about another thing where God delivers him. Now, this one is interesting, and I'll tell you this. What I love is that it says here that he delivers them out of their misery, out of their trouble. But in this one, it almost seems to be telling us that God is protecting us when we're in places that we have to be, but maybe don't want to be. And because it clearly says here that he was the one who stirred up the deep. He spoke and raised up the stormy wind. They were there for business. They were doing what they should be, and they were glad when the seas were quiet. And because of even that, give loving kindness. Now, this was something that for me took on a little bit more life when I spent a little bit of time, and I'm finding that the Treasury of David has been a great commentary helping me through the Psalms. And I know it's a little bit long here, but I want to read. I have an excerpt here that I want to read to you as we look at this. It says, they that go down to the sea in ships. Navigation was so little practiced among the Israelites that mariners were invested with a high degree of mystery. And their craft was also looked upon as one of singular daring and peril. Tales of the sea thrilled all the hearts with awe. And he who had been to Ophir or Tarshish and had returned alive was looked upon as a man of renown, an ancient mariner to be listened to with reverent attention. Voyages were looked on as a descending to the abyss, going down to the sea in ships. Whereas now, bolder and more accustomed sailors talk about the high seas, and then it says that they that do business in great waters. If it had not been for the business they do, they would have never ventured to the ocean. For we never read this caught me here. We never read in the scriptures of any man taking his pleasure on the sea. So averse was the Israelitish mind to seafaring that we do not hear of even Solomon himself keeping a pleasure boat. And then it says the Mediterranean was a great sea to David and his countrymen, and they viewed those who had business on it with no small degree of admiration. So I had never even thought of that, that when David and all his, or Solomon and all his riches, what he did not have was a yacht, a massive boat. In today's world, the richest people own yachts, and that's a place they go for leisure. They wanna be there for leisure. That here is this clear call out. That was not the case. They go down into the depths, and I believe that's really where the spiritual side of this is saying that even down in the depths, in the places that we are, because we have to be, not necessarily we're there because of our own doing, but because of the trouble that comes on us from the outside world. Even in those times, God saves us and he redeems us. So I thought that quite interesting as we study and read through these sections, these pictures. And then as we get to verse 33, we see this picture of God changing. It says he changes rivers into wilderness and springs of water into thirsty ground. And once again, I had to go do a little study because this was a picture I didn't fully understand. It's saying God can judge like that. He can take the rivers and turn it into wilderness. He can take the springs of water that brings life and turn it into barren land, just like that. It says, because of the wicked who dwell in it, God's judgment can change anything. Yet at the same time, verse 34, or rather 35 tells us that God's blessing can come at any time. God's blessing comes, it says, he changes the wilderness into a pool of water and dry land into springs of water. And there he makes the hungry to dwell so that they may establish an inhabited city. We see that God is going to do what God wants to do, and he has the power to do it like that. And because of it, we trust him. We trust what God is doing and we give him praise and thanksgiving for it. I'm going to take you all the way down here to verse 43. And I've marked this. Who is wise? That is the question. Who is wise? We want to be wise in our lives. And here it is. Who is wise? Let him give heed to these things and consider the loving kindness of the Lord. Give heed to these things and consider the loving kindness of the Lord. Again, we see this command. We need to give heed and consider the loving kindness. Be thankful for God's redemption. Be thankful for God's salvation and protection of us. That's the story of this psalm. When we're challenged in our lives and we're not feeling very grateful, we come back to Psalm 107 and we're given time after time, picture after picture of reasons to be thankful to God. So as we close this up, there's just a couple of thoughts that I wanted to leave you with here, and that's this. First of all, a couple of questions that were challenged to me as I was studying this. Would people around you describe you as grateful? And when I think about me, I have to think about that question. Do people around me describe me as grateful? Maybe another thought of that, and this is kind of what I was thinking through. Maybe others might describe me as grateful. Does my family, the people who I live with every day, do they describe me as grateful? And then there was another question. It's this: what interrupted your week? What has interrupted your week so far? Or maybe interrupted your day today? And how did you react? If we're a grateful people, we are a joyful people. And these little interruptions are not going to be, they're not going to derail us. We're going to continue to be thankful because we realize the things we have to be thankful for are eternal. There are some things I just wrote down here real quick that we should be thankful for that we see in this psalm. We should be thankful for God's grace. We should be thankful for God's guidance. He leads us through the wilderness. We should be thankful for God's goodness because God's goodness is not tied to what is a perceived blessing. It is tied to his character and who he is and what he's already done for us. We should be thankful for his freedom because he brought us out of darkness. We should be thankful that he can change a situation in an instant. There's so many things we should be thankful for. So as you think about Psalm 107 and God's goodness, The command is clear over and over again. Give thanks. I hope this helped you as you walk through Psalm 107. I hope it encouraged you. If it did, make sure you hit the like button. If you're brand new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. Thanks so much for watching. See you in the next video.